Greetings, advanced practitioners at Walt Disney International. It's Frank Spencer, and I am here today to take you through the first video in the Advanced Practitioner Facilitation Guide series. And the first one that I'm going to take you through today is the Introduction to Futures Thinking and Strategic Foresight. This, of course, is what it looks like. It's your first module, and it says, "So you want to create the future." So let's get started. So before you even leave this first page, I wanted to share a few thoughts with you. One is that the reason that we're recording these videos for you is so that, just like we said in London, you will be able to multiply so others can add. And what we mean by that is that we are covering material that you don't necessarily have to share in a primer presentation to new members or to leadership, but material that certainly will help you in the back of your mind understand strategic foresight better so that you have greater confidence and greater capacity and ability to share the primer with others and help them to understand the importance of strategic foresight. So I also wanted to just briefly say to you that during this presentation and during your presentation based on this video, this will arm you with what are often known as the Ben Duffy questions, which simply means that you will be able to answer questions that people haven't even really asked yet. Or if they do ask them, you will be able to address them knowing what they were going to ask. So that's what we're trying to arm you with. And when you are able to do that, people know that you know the material, you have a confidence in knowing the material, and it lets people know that what they're thinking or wondering about, you are already well informed about, and therefore the material is sound and well structured. So let's stay on this first slide for just a moment as I share some extra material with you. Now, as I said, in your manual and in Module 1, the Introduction to Strategic Foresight, there's already a lot of good material. And what we've written there for you is the main things that you would share with an audience when doing this module during a workshop. So the material that I'm going to share with you is extra material. And on this page, I wanted to share with you, and I wrote notes, so you'll see me looking over at the notes, that we want to stress, and this is a good place for you to stress, the power of strategic foresight in uncovering opportunities. Of course, strategic foresight is powerful for identifying risks, for identifying threats, and that's important and we need to do that. But the reason we called the primer "So You Want to Create the Future" is because we want to stress the importance of creating aspirational, transformational futures that lead to opportunities. So this is a great place for you to stress that strategic foresight is powerful and important for Walt Disney International because it will help the company across the globe, which is so powerful, to identify opportunities that have not yet been seen because our present strategy is either working wonderfully or because it blinds us by assumptions and biases, which both are realistic and both are something that need to be addressed. So some other notes that I wrote for this slide, many of course have used strategic foresight to identify risk management, but remember that we're building a philosophy of opportunity development and multiple alternative development within the organization. We're going to look at that more deeply later in the primer. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which is the slide that you've seen many, many times of Walt Disney. Of course, as we said in the notes here, he's standing in Anaheim in this picture with some of the local leadership. The mayor of Orange County is in the picture here somewhere. I can't remember which one he is. And they are discussing plans for the soon-to-be-built Disneyland in 1955. And of course, you have the powerful quote from Walt here about a volatile business of ours and things changing so rapidly that we need to keep our aim focused on the future. And one of the important things that we pointed out in the module notes for you was that the strategic foresight and futures thinking is really a part of the Walt Disney Company. It's a part of its DNA, part of its heritage. Walt, of course, as we put in the notes, was considered the optimistic futurist. So what I also wanted to share with you on this slide that could be helpful, and you may or may not want to share, but will certainly help you to point something deeper out to your audiences and to think more deeply about what's being said here. It's this concept of the VUCA landscape. You all are familiar with this, VUCA, VUCA. And Walt addresses that VUCA landscape, which really is something that was only made in the late 90s, early 2000s, this VUCA acronym that is. But Walt saw the volatility of change even back in the mid 50s. So this is a great place for you to share the VUCA acronym. It's going to come up more in the primer, in different places in the primer. So I'll point that out to you, and those are places that you could also share this. But setting it up early certainly doesn't hurt. So the V in VUCA stands for volatility. And volatility is all about the speed of change, the rapid speed of change, and the shortening intervals between change. Things are so volatile now that the time between change is shorter and shorter. And so that is something that you can share, that today we live in this VUCA environment, and what the V, the U, the C, and the A stand for, and that Walt saw that even then. And as I said, this is a great place for you to begin sharing, especially over this slide. Beginning with this slide and the next 2 or 3 slides is a great place to start sharing about VUCA. So the U, of course, is uncertainty. We often tell audiences and clients, we've told you before, that a good way to describe this, among many others, is imagine that you have dice, but you don't know what numbers on the dice. It could be 1 through 6 or 9 through 12. You don't know. And so when you roll the dice, you're uncertain about what is going to come up. That's the kind of environment we live in today. We have dice sometimes, but we roll it and don't know what number is going to come up. And so that's often how it is in our business today. We don't know what's on the horizon. We don't know what's about to come up or what's about to emerge. So it's a very uncertain environment. The C is for complexity, which you're going to see on the next slide. So why don't we just go ahead and advance to that slide. So this is slide number 3, I believe. And on this slide, it talks about the complexity. We touch on this briefly in the speaker's notes, but this is also a great place for you to point out the complexity is the natural order of things. Futures thinking doesn't only turn a complex and unclear world into a map of innovation. It does that because the more complexity grows, the more complex things become. The C in our VUCA acronym, the more space, the more landscape we have for innovation, for creation, for opportunity, identification, and development, because it's the natural order of things. When things grow up, when they mature, they become more complex. When a baby grows to a teenager, to an adult, they don't become more simple. We become more complex in our thoughts, in our speech, and our actions. When we look out into the universe, as we have been able to do increasingly as the decades go by, we see a more and more complex unfolding of the universe, more complexity of creation, of evolution. And so it is with all things in the natural order. Complexity is natural and a sign of maturity. I also wanted to point out on this slide that this is a good place to be thinking for yourselves, or maybe to share if you get the chance, or if questions come up, you'll be able to answer this, that historians make great futurists because really it's the same toolkit, just in reverse. And this is a place where I also want to share with you that the past, the present, and the future are one continuous timeline or time frame. And each of them impact the other. So, for instance, the way that we think about the past, whether it are our cultural thoughts about the past, our individual thoughts about the past, ones that we have from our family, etc., that impacts the way that we see the present and we see the future unfolding. This is obviously subconscious or unconscious thoughts, and we don't realize that's happening, but our past impacts who we think we are today, who we think we will become, etc. That's an easy thought to grasp. What we often don't think of is that also the way we see the present, the way that we define the world around us right now, really, and this is a little bit harder to grasp, but when you think about it, you'll see the power of it. The way we define the present informs the way we see the past and the way we see the future. So you might scratch your head a little bit and say, no, the past is unalterable, and in one definition, in one way, of course, that's absolutely true. But as we all well know, and you guys are brilliant, you know this, that the past really is in flux in some ways, because it all depends on what story we tell about the past, from whose viewpoint, what history books we read, how much we know about the past, really defines what the past really is. And so the way we see the present, ourselves, our organizations, our countries, etc., really defines the past and therefore defines our future. And then likewise, you knew where I was going with this, the way that we see the future, this one's a real mind bender, really defines our present and the past. Because the way we think things are going to unfold defines who we are today. And this is that same phrase that we always tell you, and it's very important for you to share with your audiences as well, your leadership, with the new Futures team members, is that futures thinking, and you're going to see this slide come up again, is really not about the future, because the way we see the future defines the actions we will take today. And likewise, it causes us to define the past that way. And so there's two things I'm really saying from this. One is that futures are time, is one continuous timeline, so past, present, and future. And that means they're all important. And futures thinking is just as much about the present and the past as it is the other way around. And also, that's why historians make great futurists. A lot of people don't realize this, but the futures field is made up of psychology, sociology, history, ethnography, anthropology, hard sciences, soft sciences, analysis, social sciences, etc. So all of those are part and parcel of futures thinking and are all important to it. So I hope some of those ideas helped you as well. Let's get to the next slide. So these is obviously three different upcoming slides on what futures thinking does, its capabilities. And this is powerful for new learners of strategic foresight, for leadership who don't know what it's all about. This is helping you to define futures thinking and strategic foresight. And so besides what you see on your speaker's notes, some of the things I wanted to tell you extra on this slide are, this is one of the reasons that science fiction is popular and often used to challenge our assumptions and identify future possibilities, because futures thinking helps us to see through new lens for game-changing solutions. And really that's what science fiction does at its core too. Not so much fantasy. I'm talking about when you read science fiction and you read about new technologies, new landscapes, new worlds, new ideas, new ways that people live, etc. So that's not to insinuate that, of course, scenarios in science fiction are the same. We know they're different, but they both have parts of one another. And science fiction does help us, as you guys have seen through some of the tools that we and you have used, that science fiction helps us to look at things through a new lens and challenge our assumptions and possibilities. So this is a great place to inspire people who are hearing this for the first time, or thinking, futures, I want to be involved in this because it has something to do with the future. That yes, science fiction is a part of this, but from a more analytical and very much research-oriented, but also strong creativity and imagination and intuition aspect. And we're going to talk about that strategic foresight equation again on another slide. So this is also a great place to talk about using foresight for preferred futures, for transformational futures, and for provocative futures. But you can just briefly touch on that here, and there'll be some other slides coming up where we can really challenge people to be provocative and at the same time to be plausible and to be possible in the way that we look at the future. Let's go to the next slide. This one talks about futures thinking really unleashing and maximizing creativity. And besides what we talk about on the in the speaker's notes here, I wanted to share with you a few things. One is that creativity does several different things for us. And these same things are what foresight does for us. So often as we talk about the link between foresight and innovation being strong, the link between futures thinking and creativity is strong, for the very reason that I just shared with you on the last slide, because it helps us to be provocative, to look at things through a new lens, to see new possibilities, new opportunities. So futures thinking is a very powerful tool for creativity in the organization. So foresight lets us look at problems in many different ways, from many different angles, which is a hallmark of creativity, right? Foresight also makes the future visible, which is, when we think about the future, we often think about new ideas, new possibilities, maybe new risks and devastations as well, or bad things happening. But we definitely also think about what could we create, what could we become, what could we aspire to. And so it helps in creativity that way. And then Foresight also uncovers new connections and combinations and relationships. And that's so powerful because that's what creativity does, or that's a hallmark of creativity, is making unseen connections, unseen combinations and relationships. So Foresight, futures thinking, can help the Walt Disney International Organization do that as well. Foresight also lets us create future worlds and environments from which to test our strategy. And that's one way for us to be really, really creative. It makes us not afraid to question what works and what doesn't work, and that's a hallmark of creativity as well. And this is a great place to bring up one of those Ben Duffy questions that I shared with you on the first slide. In other words, a question that somebody might be thinking at this point, but they're afraid to ask or haven't asked yet, and you answer it before they even ask. And it's the question we hear all the time. Wait a second, this futures thinking thing sounds like you're saying that we can all learn to be futures thinkers and all learn to be creative. And doesn't an organization need a primary genius, the lone genius, the lone superstar, the lone inventor? And of course, Walt Disney with the Walt Disney Company is a prime example of that. A genius, brilliant man. Also Steve Jobs, another genius, brilliant individual who really was credited for driving Apple, and for good reason. But the reality is, it's been proven, and I'm going to let you look up some of the research on this and do some scanning for yourselves, that that's a fallacy. And that in reality, even these geniuses need outside thoughts. They're supported by the people around them, and that we very much can create that genius atmosphere in our organization. So just because there are people that seem to be more creative than me, or more creative than the next guy, doesn't mean we can't be creative, or that those are the only people that can drive innovation forward. That's a fallacy. It's been proven in terms of research that this is not really true. And so that's something that you might want to address, and then people are already saying, wow, you're really smart. I was going to ask that question anyway. So let's go to the next slide. And this is the last in this trio of slides on the power of futures thinking, what futures thinking can do for us. So besides the notes on the page, I want to share with you that this is a great place to briefly note that there are tools in the Strategic Foresight Toolkit to challenge present assumptions and biases so that better foresight work can be done with stronger outcomes. So besides the fact that futures thinking illuminates disruptive innovations, it does that because we can break through our present assumptions and biases, which makes us iterative and linear in our thinking, and futures thinking really through a variety of ways, through unveiling assumptions, biases, unveiling implications, unveiling future worlds and environments and circumstances. It really breaks through and allows us to see better, stronger outcomes and possibilities. So that's one thing that you could really share on this page. Let's go to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite. The future is not an empty space, but like the past, it is an active aspect of the present. It's very important that you share this slide with your audience, because this is another one of those where this sort of Ben Duffy question comes up, because this is where people start thinking, or maybe they already were thinking, a lot of leadership for very good reason, because we're busy and we have things that we have to do, deliverables. Isn't thinking about the future a waste of time? If I think about the future, I'm not doing what I need to do today. I've got deliverables. I have pressing outcomes at the end of every day. I don't have time to be thinking about the future. When the future comes, we'll deal with it. And one of the reasons we think that is because in the back of our minds, especially in the West, I'm speaking to a lot of you in the East today, and you may not have the same problem, but in the West in particular, and I think that Western viewpoint that's permeating the world for many different reasons, causes us to think the future is a time, and time hasn't come yet, and therefore I'll worry about that time when it comes, because I have to worry about now, the present. And there's a phrase called the tyranny of the urgent. And the phrase basically means the tyranny of the urgent means that I can be, that the urgent, the now, the present can be a tyrant. It can really lord over me and stop me from seeing things that might be unfolding. And so when I change my practitioners, my audience, my leadership's view from the future being a time to the future being a place, it might not have arrived yet, but again, just like that timeline, the past, the present, and the future are one big timeline, really. They're on the same timeline. It, just like the past and present, are filled with people, objects, technologies, landscapes, cities, ideas, innovations. The future is filled with those things. Now, there's multiple of them from where we stand today, but the future is not a time as much as it is a place that is filled with ideas and stuff. And so that's what we're doing in Strategic Foresight, is we're helping audiences, organizations, leadership to see. It's so important to think about this place and what is there so that we can be successful in it. Who is there? What do they think? What are their values in this place that exists? So this is what I put in the notes for us, is to really think about the future as being a place and not so much a time. And in that way, we can really guide the culture of the organization and the operations of the organization and deliver those preferred outcomes, those preferred strategies, and those aspirational, transformational futures. So let's go to the next slide. And this is that slide that I mentioned earlier, that the way we think about the future directly impacts the decisions we make today. So besides what is in the speaker's notes, the way we view the future as individuals and as an organization, as the Walt Disney International organization, impacts the actions we take today, both consciously and subconsciously. So that's somewhat what is already written in the notes here, but it's very important for people to understand that this not only happens consciously, but subconsciously, and that's why it's important for the organization to think about the future, so that we can consciously, intentionally, purposefully direct, or as we said in the first slide, create the future. We don't want to wait, we don't want to hesitate, and remember, and I'll probably say this again during the presentation, it's a great quote for you to insert anywhere in this presentation, and that is the concept that the future is, what's already on this slide, that the future directly impacts the decisions that we make today. So that you can impart that anywhere in the presentation. So the next slide, wait, I don't know what you think about the future, of course, is where you're going to share the sweet questions. And I just wanted to say that, and we've said this to you before, you know this, your audience doesn't have to know this, but it's important for you to know this, that this is a futures fit SWOT analysis. And so basically what we mean is that SWOT is SWOT, but we took the O for opportunities in the middle, and we divided it into two pieces, which is the external and the emerging issues, or the internal ideas. So it's external and internal. And so, as I wrote here in the notes, this is a SWOT analysis. SWOT, it stands for strengths, the S. W is weaknesses. The first E is emerging ideas within the organization. The second E is external opportunities. So you can now see we've moved from the internal strengths, weaknesses, emerging ideas to the external opportunities and threats. And so now you've addressed both the internal and the external environments in these questions. And so if you go to the next slide, this is where you would actually ask those SWOT or futures fit SWOT analysis questions. So you've got in your notes what are the requirements to actually do this exercise with your audience. One thing that I would like to add that's not necessarily in the notes is that if you have a large crowd of participants, you may want to pick certain individuals to answer certain questions, because obviously if everybody in the room, even if you had 10 people and they all answered all 7 questions, it's going to take forever. So be wise enough, I know you already are, to pick certain people to make a point, to answer certain questions. And I would say, if nothing else, you really want to get to the last question. The other ones are important. You might just want them to answer them to think for themselves for the first time. People have never gone through this exercise and never really stopped to think very much how they think about the future. It's a great opportunity for them to do that just on a personal basis and quiet of their own notebook for a few minutes, but have several people in the room at least answer question number 7. If all constraints were removed and you could direct what is done, what would you do? Because this is the question that really brings everything home and says to the participants, think big, think provocatively, think about possibilities, think beyond 3 years, think beyond 5 years. Let's think about all constraints being busted out. What will we do? What might emerge? What would be possible? What could we transform? What would be our aspirations and goals? So let's go to the next slide. And this is the slide where we get back to our original idea of creating the future, but we point out that we're all creating the future. And this is where I wanted to add that it's important to note that we are all, each and every one of us, creating the future. And all of our individual lives, of our organizations, we're creating the future of the world around us as well, not just of where we work. And this is why futures thinking and strategic foresight should not be in the hands of a select few individuals. We really need futures thinking to be a competency and a culture, and must create a future collective in our organizations that is diverse. So there's a couple things I want to say from that. One is that, of course, as Andy Bird has said to us all, that this is not an initiative, what we're doing. We're creating a strategic foresight culture in our organization. So besides the fact that there is a future team in every one of these regions, it's also important that we get the message out and the word out about futures thinking and get people thinking that way. So that's why we're not just creating scenarios. We also have the opportunity to share trend decks with groups, or to take groups through futures wheels, or through some of the other tools when it's appropriate at different meetings or different opportunities throughout the year. And that is a great way to seed this culture futures thinking throughout Walt Disney International and throughout the organization. So let's go to the next slide. And also I did want to say something here too about, I think the other thing I wanted to say was that we need to see futures thinking as a team sport, as Yvette often says, because it's important that we have that diversity of thought. So we're all creating the future, not one of us, and the more diversity of thought that we have on our futures teams, but across the organization, the better off we'll be. And that's why some of the teams that have already started their 2.0, Australia, LATAM, Singapore, others, have been careful to and wise to pick people who have diverse backgrounds and come from different parts of the business so that we can get a diversity of thought on the team. So let's go to the next slide. And this is the slide where we talk about futures thinking being that philosophy that I just talked about, that culture in the organization, not being an app that we turn on once in a while to use in a certain place, but really being the operating system that runs in the background of the organization that is driving all of our strategy, our innovation, our organizational development, and transformation. And so one of the things that I wanted to point out on this slide to you is that you can also focus on the last piece of this slide, the strategy, the innovation, the organizational transformation, etc. Strategic foresight maps that are emerging ideas and environments that are helping us find the right talent. There's another place that you can think of besides strategy, talent development, to create the right products, to implement the right models. In other words, what I'm trying to say is there's no place in the organization that we can't apply this background philosophy, this operating system to. And so as you think more about strategic foresight, you'll see, oh my gosh, it really helps us to pick the right talent. It helps us in evaluation of talent. It helps us in human resources. It helps us in learning and development. It helps us in organizational development and transformation. And you know better than I do, so many places this can be applied to, because as we look to that place that is the future, not just a time, but a place, sitting in that place is different kinds of work, different kinds of organizations, different kinds of technologies, etc. There's no place that strategic foresight can't inform, and that's why it needs to be this operating system in the organization. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the slide that talks about strategy, creating value, and if that's true and that's what it sketches out, that's the landscape that it creates, then foresight is sketching out future context and conditions that creates that strategy or value ultimately. So an extra thing that you can really add on this slide, or at least can be in the background of your mind when you're sharing this slide, is that when we look at drivers outside of our traditional areas of concern, the ones that are of concern to our organization, in this particular instance, the big driver for the Walt Disney Company is entertainment, of course. We can identify blue ocean space. And some of you are probably already familiar with this term, blue ocean. It's the opposite of that red ocean, or the occupied market space that is filled up already. So it's great when you're the Walt Disney Company and you're one of the leaders in that red space, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to still identify blue ocean space and blue sky thinking, which means that it's wide open. We're the only ones playing that space because we were the first to sketch out the opportunity and the value that is in that unseen, untapped, undeveloped space. And strategic foresight helps us to do that when we think into the future. We think about impacts, we think about emerging ideas, and we think about new scenarios and new worlds and new places. So this is the first time that your audience actually hears about STEEP, really. And that's if you're sharing from the last slide and going to this slide, where you're really starting to share about, and as are already in the speaker notes on this page, that we want to go beyond the basic macro drivers of social, technological, environmental, economic, and political, and think about all those broad drivers, and we want to use STEEP to be broad. So it's the first time that your audience has actually heard about the STEEP acronym, and they're going to hear about it more in other presentations. And so you can let them know that there are other big drivers, not just STEEP, but of course also in entertainment, as I've already shared with you, as you well know. Arts is a big one. Education would be a big driver. Health would be a big driver. So any of these giant drivers that in any era or a large period of time are creating the trends. That's one of the reasons that today technology is so popular, because we've come to define it in a certain way, and we all have phones and all of our gadgets and all of our technology that we carry around with us. And so technology is a big driver today that's creating social media trends and mobility trends and those kinds of things. But there's other big drivers as well. And this is a great place for you to point out to them and maybe ask them what do they think some of the big drivers are. So let's go to the next slide. And this, of course, is the slide where we talk about companies not being ready for what is emerging and therefore missing the boat. So, of course, as you see in the slide here, and you already know, Britannica printed encyclopedias weren't taken out by another printing company. They were really taken out by the internet. And so that means that a traditional encyclopedia, hardcover print company has to think about the internet long before the internet was used widely for things like Wikipedia. Another, of course, example is Sony. You know this one all too well. And the Walkman and the idea for digital music and sharing music, and they really missed the boat on that. And there's others, of course, as well, like Kodak or Blockbuster. And you can think of what took them out. So we need to look beyond and forward into the future of those disruptors that will disrupt our model. And you guys have been doing a great job of that already. What will disrupt entertainment? What will disrupt movies? What will disrupt theme parks? What will disrupt television, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't wait until our strategy is outdated to alter it or to develop new strategy. This is the lesson expressed in breakpoints and S-curves. So that's another thing that you can be thinking of in the back of your mind when you're thinking about this slide, or maybe you'll get a chance to share, or somebody asks a question, you can share with them, yes, do you know about breakpoints? When something is growing and going up the S-curve and everything's going great, that's when you have to think about the breakpoint. That's when you need to think about what the breakthrough to the next iteration or the next transformation of your business model or of your innovation or products is. And you don't wait till something's dying off, because that's when your strategy is already dragging you down, and you can't wait until that time comes to take care of that. And so the concept of S-curves and there's a lot of theory behind that, and I'm saying some of this to you and a little bit more as we go on in this presentation. I'm going to say some things to you that you'll be able to look up on the net or research for yourself. I want you to have the chance to do that. I know some of you have wanted from us, what book should I read to know more about? And this is one of those places. You can study breakpoints and breakthroughs, breakthrough theory, or S-curve theory, or natural growth theory. And this will help you to understand greatly why strategic foresight is about looking forward and then finding what those breakpoints are and implementing them now, even while something's doing great, even while you're selling a million, products, or everybody's seen Guardians of the Galaxy over and over and over again. You're already thinking about not just what the next Marvel movie is, but what the next curve of movies are, or what the next curve of entertainment is altogether. So far beyond what we need to think about today, while things are still going well. So next slide, obviously, is one that's critical for your audience, and that is that futures thinking and strategic foresight is like the immune system of business. And the immune system doesn't only make us healthy when we're sick, it stops us from getting sick. And strategic foresight stops the company from getting sick. Across the board, like we've already shared, whether it's in HR, learning development, organizational development and transformation, it doesn't matter what part of the business in, studios, in the case of Disney in particular, it stops us from having a letdown or being overtaken by a threat or being run over by risk. It stops us from getting sick. So you can go through all of the parts of this slide. Some of this is already in speaker notes for you. Some of the stuff that I wrote down to share here is that before we have a problem, strategic foresight identifies what they might be, what these problems might be, so we can navigate the future. The reason I wrote that phrase down is because it doesn't appear anywhere else, and that's a great phrase, to navigate the future. So your leadership will love to hear that strategic foresight will help you to navigate the future, navigate around the obstacles to still reach where you want to go. Even if we are at A and we want to get to Z, but we see all these obstacles in between, we can navigate around the obstacles and still get to our desired goals and outcomes. So another thing that you can add also on this page is that strengthening collective capacity, which is one of the things we see on the slide here. Strategic foresight creates a common language, and that's what we're doing with Walt Disney International, is creating a common language across Walt Disney International for greater output of the WDI organization. Because up to now, there's been so much success in WDI, but we can see even more as we link the pieces, link the regions together. So the regions, of course, continue to produce separately, but also to produce globally in a global environment. How powerful is that? And strategic foresight allows us to do that. So we haven't even begun on that journey quite yet, but we're getting there where we've made a lot of headway in our strategic foresight effort in WDI. And now that we have made that headway in the organization, we can start to see this global output. So this common language around the future, aspirations and goals, a fantastic team building tool is strategic foresight. Illuminates unexpected implications. Strategic foresight has tools that identify probable and possible impacts for today's decisions, helping us to see the opportunities, the threats that we are generating. So that's some of the ideas that you could also share from this slide, and I'm sure most of this is self-explanatory. Let's go to the next slide. And there's two slides here together that start off sounding really strange. That's this first slide, that discovery, of course, is the act of considering, what all might be out there. How many islands are there? How many new lands? How many new multiple alternative futures as we discover? But as we all well know, every day we have to make decisions. We have to. I have to. You have to. And decision really is, by definition, the act of killing every future but one. Taking one path, going down that path, and all other paths are now, null and void, so to speak. So that sounds really sad and really scary. And what I want to share from this slide that you can share extra is, this slide sounds terrible, but it's a fantastic setup for the next slide and the power of strategic foresight. So if your audience is not convinced about the power of strategic foresight yet, they will be in these two slides. Because traditional strategic planning and organizational development methods require that we take one linear path. So linear is a good word on this slide. One linear path based on insights, on benchmarking, on present day analysis, on business intelligence, etc. Every time we make a decision, we are killing all other future possibilities, but this is not the best way to create the future. So, in other words, traditional strategic planning methods aren't the best way to create the future. And in this VUCA environment, if we want to create the future, we can't stay married to traditional strategic planning methods. We need something more. So the next slide, let's go there, really is what brings this home. So sad, we've made a decision, we've killed all futures but one. Aha, but wait, strategic foresight stops that from happening. Crazy, right? Strategic foresight actually lets us investigate all those futures, and instead of killing any of them, we can use them all. So here's the notes that I wrote extra on this slide. Besides what's written in the speaker notes for you, I added this. This last statement on this slide, or in the speaker notes on this slide, is the most powerful one of all. And that's the statement that says our resulting decisions are therefore much more likely to be multifaceted, robust, and achieve long-term success. Strategic foresight reveals multiple alternatives from which we can collect and converge to create a multifaceted path going forward. This makes our strategies, our innovation, our services future fit. If we think this way and we plan this way and we build this way, or we create this way, we have future fit services, future fit strategies, future fit innovations, and future empowered. Because in effect, we now have a multiple personality, so to speak. You don't have to say that. This is for your sake. We have a multiple personality strategy in place. We have multiple personality innovations or services that are ready for any future and pulls the best from each of these multiple alternative futures that we have discovered, building from the future rather than building from today. So the reason that when we make a decision it kills every future in our traditional strategic planning models is because we're building from today. We're making decisions from today. When we make decisions based on our multiple alternative futures that we've discovered, we can pull from all of them, we can incorporate them, and now what we're doing or what we're creating has the DNA and the culture of multiple outcomes. And so now we're not killing every future from one. We're actually strategizing, planning, operating, building, acting, or innovating from a multifaceted base or platform. And the more you think about this, the more you see these two slides so clearly, you will grasp the power of strategic foresight. If these two slides you grasp, or if there's no part of this presentation you get across, I really believe it's these two slides right here. They're so powerful. Go back and listen to what I just said on these two slides. Soak it in, and this will really help you to drive the power of strategic foresight for Walt Disney International and the entire organization home to the leadership and to new future thinkers and new future team members. Let's go to the next slide, and this is Cone of Possibilities. We cannot predict the future, but we can map it. You all know that, and this is important for people to understand, for leadership to understand, we're not trying to predict the future. Nobody can say the future is going to turn out exactly like this, especially in a VUCA environment where things are more volatile, more complex, they're speeding up, change is the only constant that we have. You can't predict. And so as I'm going to mention again in just a minute, there's a big difference between foresight and forecasting. Don't confuse those two terms. So what I wrote extra on these slides is that many of you have seen us, Kedge, use the analogy of the incoming storm here instead of the flashlight. Or as somebody said in London, I can't remember who, I'm sorry, that this is the torch of planning. And Sophia, our graphic recorder, even wrote that down, the torch of planning. I love that. So you've seen us use the incoming storm to explain the cone of possibilities, how the weather person always explains it. There is a storm coming in, it's most likely to hit here, but could also hit way up here or way down here somewhere. And that's just like this torch of planning or the flashlight of possibilities. So close to the flashlight, you'll see in the picture here, the beam is small, and there is a small variance there. There's less variance. And that's because there's less variance or less possible outcomes close to today. But as we get further out into the future, just like your beam of light, the beam gets wider and bigger. And that's because as we go out, as we're going to see in just a minute, there are greater possibilities. And so future thinking, strategic foresight helps us not to think so close into today that we miss what's coming in the future. What's on the horizon is beyond our small variance and our small scope of sight close up. If we step back and we look, we'll see a broader beam of light in the future, and there's more possibility, there's more landscape. And so we need to look at that broader beam of light because there's more out there than what's close to us today. So on the next slide, let's go there. We're looking at our crazy map of the early explorers. And this is one that's sometimes hard for people to understand because we, again, say here that it's more important to be imaginative and insightful than it is to be 100% right. Boy, that's hard in an organization, most of our organizations today, that requires to be right, get the numbers right, don't fail, don't trip up, don't mess up. And we really need to have an environment where we can fail safe. I heard somebody say that this past weekend when I spoke at a conference, that somebody said we don't need environments really where we can fail, learn to fail, but we need environments where it's safe to fail. And so that's one of the things that strategic foresight allows us to do, is allows us to say, look, there's this broad swath, multiple futures, we're going to pull from them. Our strategy is going to be future fit and future empowered going forward. It's going to have the DNA of the future in it, multiple futures, and therefore we have a greater possibility to fail safe and still be successful in our strategy. So one of the things that I added on this slide, besides what's written in the speaker's note, is this is a good place to introduce the strategic foresight equation that I shared with you earlier, which is this: data plus intuition plus research plus creativity equals strategic foresight. One more time: data plus intuition plus research plus creativity equals strategic foresight. So you'll see there we have the quantitative measurements and the qualitative measurements. Both of them are including strategic foresight when we're thinking about the future, thinking about trends, thinking about patterns, thinking about emerging ideas, thinking about implications, or building our scenarios. It's quant and qual. It's all in our map, and it helps us to be explorers of the future so that we see that broader swath of a broader beam of light and that we're more successful in looking outward. So let's look at the next slide. Any useful idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous. And as I often say to clients, when I first ever heard this phrase, which is a famous phrase in the foresight field, I thought the phrase itself was ridiculous. It sounds crazy. Of course we don't want to spend our days thinking about ridiculous ideas. It's a waste of time for the company. It's a waste of the company's time, their money, their talent, their outcomes, and their actions. But in reality, when we're doing strategic foresight, we do need to look at those ideas that we think are at least a little bit ridiculous, or at least are outside of the realm of what we consider to be the tried and the true and the traditional. Because if we don't, then we're only thinking about what we already know. We're thinking about the small variance, the light close to the torch. We're not thinking about the stuff that's coming that's broader, a broader field of abilities in that VUCA environment. And so besides what is in our speaker notes here, what I wrote is what is ridiculous to one person or to one group may be exciting or make perfect sense to another group. We even see this from industry to industry. What one industry thinks is crazy, another industry is already on top of. What Facebook is looking at may not be what Disney's looking at, and vice versa. And so what's crazy to one is common or natural to another. So we need to look across our industry or outside of our industry for those ridiculous ideas of disruptors. And this phrase, by the way, was created by Jim Dator, who created the Strategic Foresight program at the University of Hawaii. This is especially true when we look outside of our industry, the very place our disruptors will come from, as I said just a moment ago. So let's look at the next slide, and this is where you really see the cone of possibilities again. And this time we're referring it to scenario mapping, because besides just relating it to the swath of possibilities or the torch of planning, or where the storm may or may not hit. We want to get more specific and let our audience know, let leadership know that scenario mapping, which is one of the goals of strategic foresight, helps us to look at alternatives and a range of possibilities over time, and shows us that our single or our baseline future is unlikely over time. So it points us the 5 futures to us here: the probable futures, the most likely, which are close in a straight line, they're linear and close into the flashlight; our possible futures, which scenarios help us look at; preferred futures, which are out in those possible futures, which are aspirations, we want them to happen; plausible futures, which are further out but are close to that linear line; and the provocative futures, which are sort of crazy and ridiculous, but definitely we need to think about, because again, it wasn't another printing company that took out Britannica. It wasn't another camera company that took out Kodak. It wasn't another video company that took out Blockbuster. We need to think about those provocative futures. So one of the things that I wrote here is, this is a great place to talk about the difference between forecasting and foresight. Forecasting is what we do when we're looking at numbers and we are looking at ideas that are really relatively close in. 3 months, 6 months, a year. I know that we do the 5-year plan too. That really shouldn't be considered forecasting, because as we've talked about many times before, those numbers in that 5-year plan are wrong the moment that you put them on paper. But of course, they help us to forecast to a degree. We really write that 5-year plan really for the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then of course we go do the 5-year plan again. That's forecasting. Foresight looks much further out. It's looking 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years out or further. And these are what we would use strategic foresight for. There are different things that we want to use forecasting for than we use foresight for. I would argue that our strategic foresight should even inform our forecast closer in. We want to do foresight first, and then we want to come back and base our forecasts on our foresight. So we want to go out, look at 10, 20 years, come back through strategic design tools, scenario design tools, backcasting, those kinds of things, and that's where we want to base our forecasting on. So we want to go out first, come back. We don't want to walk from the today forward to the future in a linear fashion. And then I also wrote on the slide, exploring the full cone helps us to balance between being too provocative, like an alien invasion or a zombie apocalypse, which some of us want, and too probable or too plausible in our outcomes, which are obvious and immediate ideas. So your audience is probably thinking about this. Many of you have asked this question, so it's another great Ben Duffy question. How provocative should we be? It's not helpful for the organization to think about aliens or zombies or going to another galaxy. And then the counter question to that is, yes, but how plausible should you be? Because it won't really help you. That's just forecasting. So we need that great balance between being provocative and being probable in our scenarios. And as I said before, it doesn't hurt to be provocative to a great sense. We really need to think of those provocative things. And then when we go to make our scenarios, we can draw that back a little bit and think about how provocative does the scenario need to be to draw in leadership, to allow them to see what we need to say so that they think about the future in a constructive and powerful way. So let's go to the next slide. And this is what we just left from, the forecasting versus the foresight, traditional business planning versus strategic foresight. And besides what you read in the speaker notes, I wrote this: our toolkit contains multiple tools to expand our cultural, mental models to be better prepared for the future, to be future fit. Assumption and bias tools, etc., those kinds of things are in our toolkit to help us to have better mental models. When we try to walk forward into the future, as I said just a minute ago, from today, we think linear, backward transports us, or thinking backwards from the future, transports us and disarms our blinders and our assumptions. So as you see on the slide, building those expanded mental maps is the key to building those multiple alternative futures, which in turn is key to building a strategy that's future fit or future empowered and multiple in its DNA. So to do that, we have to start from the future and work backwards And we want to work all the way back to our expanded mental maps, which is building a foresight culture in our organizations. Now, as you all know, this next slide we show in scenarios, we show in trends, we show in scanning, we show here in the primer, because it really helps to reinforce the idea that foresight works from the outside in. Foresight works from the outside in. And so besides what you know from this slide and what is in the speaker notes of the external environment being steep, our big drivers, and beyond steep, of course, also other drivers like in entertainment, health, education, and then the industry level and the organizational or focal issue level, the internal, the micro level, this macro, meta, micro. I also just briefly wrote here that you may get a question about focal issues because it's on the screen. People always ask, yes, focal issues, this is so important. How do we find our focal issue? And you know that this is not really the workshop or the facilitation moment to address focal issues, but you can at least tell them this one phrase, and that besides what is written here in your speaker notes, we always tell people that focal issues are what keeps the leadership awake at night. A focal issue is what keeps your leadership awake at night, that they need to answer, that they're concerned about or worried about. And so I think that answer alone will help people go like, oh, I get it. I know what a focal issue is. And leave them at that until you get to really teaching about focal issues in another workshop. So this next slide, of course, is our analogy about the difference between forecasting, way down at soil testing, and in the middle you've got benchmarking and competitive intelligence. And at topography, that analogy is, of course, strategic foresight, the 30,000-foot view. And the extra bit of notes that I wrote on this were really almost nothing because I think that we wrote a lot of good notes here on this page, and I don't want to confuse you with any more. There's not a lot that you need to add. This is a place, though, that I wanted to share with you that if any of you are interested, and I know some of our strategic foresight APs, advanced practitioners in Russia, asked about what books can I read? I want to get my hands on more material. If you can ever find Futures Thinking Part 1 and 2 from Wendell Bell, W-E-N-D-E-L-L, Wendell Bell, B-E-L-L. It's old, it's outdated to a great degree, and yet it still has a lot of powerful information about how the strategic foresight field started, contains a lot of these kinds of thoughts in it about why we need to look from the 30,000-foot view, about time elements in foresight, etc. So that's sort of way off the slide, but I know that a lot of you are looking for resources, and the book Futures Thinking Volumes 1 and 2 from Wendell Bell is a great resource. So let's just go to the next slide. Of course, that last slide was a really important slide for your clients and for your audience. And this one also drives that point home at why that topography view, why that 30,000-foot view is so important. And I wrote a couple of notes here, and that is the problem with forecasts is that they often have incorrect intervals. So you'll see this one part of the slide here that says long-term forecast. And the point that we're trying to make here, because I want you to understand each one of these pictures, is that if we're forecasting and over a couple of years period, something looks like it's going up and up and up. When we're doing foresight, we may be able to show that that really is only a short-term rise. Whereas when we look long-term and we see the big map, the big picture, it's really still a downward slide. We had just maybe 2 or 3 years of an upward turn, and we think that's a long-term thing that's going to happen, much like the dot-com bubble burst, where in reality that was a short-term, and it's not the best example in the world, but that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. That some things can be short-term and they look like they're going to last forever, and really when we do foresight, we can see it's the opposite way. It's a long-term downslide or a long-term upward trend when over a couple of years it might be going down. We still need to invest in it because it might be long-term. So this is where forecasting can really give us incorrect interval identification. I also wrote what Walt Disney International is doing is not an initiative, but it's a culture change. I said this to you already earlier. This is a great place to share that. A brief explanation of patterns or of combinations of trends is good here. because people might ask, what are patterns and narratives? And you can just tell them, of course, patterns are powerful because today trends are colliding with one another. No trend stays in isolation. That at the end of the year, which is coming up now, we see all these top 10 trend lists, and they oftentimes aren't helpful because trends can blind us to what really is emerging, which are the combinations of trends, which are longer term, these patterns that are evolving. And then also, another great slide is the future hacking slide here. And what we don't mention on the slide is the term future jacking with a J, jacking, like hijacking a car. And I often say to people, Foresight allows us to go into the future, 30 years, 20 years, 50 years, like Intel does, 50 to 100 years, and hijack strategy, hijack a car, hijack strategy, hijack innovations, and bring them back to today. So it's not just about hacking the future so that we create new strategy or new opportunities, but hijacking it, bringing something that some people might think are 20 years away, and when we put it in our scenarios and we think about it, we really say, wait a second, we can make that opportunity happen sooner than people thought that it would. Now that we've identified what it is and identified the path forward to it, we can bring that pathway, that interval, and make it shorter. We're future empowered now. We can bring the future to today. We can create the future now. So let's go to the next slide, and this is the push and pull of the future. And I just wanted to mention briefly on this slide that both ends of the spectrum are important. We're not saying, and we never were saying, that the push of the future, which is the trends pushing you forward, are not important. That is important, and the trends are pushing us. So regardless of what we do, we're going to be pushed forward by the trends. We want to pay attention to the full spectrum so that we can take advantage of both the push and pull of the future. So both ends of the spectrum are important. There is another aspect to the pull as well, because we always say the pull of the future, of course, is like the kedge, and you don't have to share the kedge, but it's a great example. If you think of another example, fantastic, how we could pull ourselves to the future. But also, I want to share with you guys, the advanced practitioners, that there's this concept made by Otto Scharmer. So another resource, if you ever want to see it, it's called Theory U. Not Y-O-U, but just the letter U, Theory U. You can look it up. It's a book that he wrote called Theory U by Otto, O-T-T-O, Scharmer, S-C-H-A-R-M-E-R. And he wrote this book that's fairly popular now called Presencing, or it's on Theory U. And that is that both the push and the pull, this one spectrum or timeline of the future, is causing, both by the pushing of the trends and what we want to pull ourselves to, our aspirations and our transformation, those two things together are creating this emerging pull of the future, so that we're not just pulling ourselves to the future, but as we investigate the future is trying to pull out of us something that is emerging, which is a little bit deeper concept and not something I would share with your audience at all, but I think it helps you tremendously to know that as future thinkers, we're really uncovering what's trying to emerge, the future that's trying to emerge. And that's the push and pull of the future together. That's why, without even saying any of that to any of your audience, I wouldn't, that it's important for them to understand the push of the trends and us pulling ourselves to the future, and that they know both and that they practice both. So this next couple of slides are all on different companies that are practicing strategic foresight in one way or another. And of course we have Ford, and I'm going to go forward and just look at the slides a little bit here. We have Intel, and they're a technology company. Going back, Ford, of course, is an automotive company. And then going forward again, we have Pepsi, which is mostly a product-based company, but service company as well. And we've put all of the quotes on here, and of course you have Shell as well, which is one of the oldest companies doing strategic foresight. They post their scenarios online, and you can share all of that. There's a couple of things I'm just backing up to the Ford slide that I wanted to share, and that is there are two other examples that you could really share. And one is, and I wrote this down somewhere for you. Here it is right here. There's a great paper that I would love for you to look up, and the first one to look it up, to listen to this video and look it up, be the first to scan it, and I'll know that you were the first to listen to the video. So it's a article or a paper that you can find online called Foresight and Policy, Thinking About Singapore's Future. Singapore, listen carefully. This is about you, and it's a relatively recent paper, and it talks about how the Singapore government uses strategic foresight on a continual basis and has for quite some time now to think about and create their future. But what's so powerful about this particular paper, again, Foresight and Policy, Thinking About Singapore's Future by Adrian, Adrian, W. J. and the last name is Kuah, Kua, Adrian W.J. Kua. And this paper basically says that the Singapore government has now realized that they've got to go far beyond using strategic foresight for threats or for risk management as they used to use it for, but they now want to use it to create the future, to create aspirational futures for their people. And one of the ways that they do that now is they don't just think about technologies or ideas, but they think about values and myths and metaphors. And you thought that was unimportant, but the whole Singapore government is now using strategic foresight and thinking about values and myths and metaphors going forward to really create their future. So you'll read it's about transformation, it's about aspirations and opportunities instead of risks and threats. And so that's one example. Another example that you can share that is so powerful, if you don't want to share these examples and they get old and stale, is go look up all about Mont Fleur. M-O-N-T, Mont Fleur, F-L-E-U-R. So Mont Fleur and scenarios. If you look that up, if you Google that, you will find that apartheid in South Africa, a lot of people don't know this, but there is actually a very popular story that right before apartheid ended, one of the catalysts to ending apartheid was a very critical meeting that was held with 25 opposition leaders from around South Africa, from the traditional government, from the opposition leadership, from different splinter governments that were taking place at that time, and some people that had been jailed before were invited to a retreat center in South Africa called Mont Fleur. And there they were led by Adam Kahan. If you want to know who this is, by the way, Adam Kahan has been in futures fields for years now, or used to at least, and I think still does consult some with Rios Partners, R-E-O-S, Rios Partners. And Adam Kahan was invited to lead these 25 opposition leaders for a week or so, I can't remember, 10 days, to create a plethora of scenarios for the future of South Africa. And so many of the things that I've already shared with you in this presentation, through it they were able to create a culture, a common language, a new language of futures thinking. They were able to get away from the linear thoughts of today that separated them and go out into the future and see where they might hold hands together and come together in unity. So they used futures thinking for opportunity development. And they created many, many, many scenarios while they were there over several days, more than several. And they boiled this down to 3 scenarios that were credited for developing the new operational systems for the new South African government. And to this day, you can even look it up. I believe there's several YouTube videos on Mont Fleur scenario creation and how they used those to form the new government that tore down apartheid and created the new government. So strategic foresight helped end apartheid. That's not something that's just yes, sort of it did. No, it absolutely did. And this is a powerful story about foresight going beyond organizational development to create governmental development, large-scale, big world solutions such as Singapore's national and governmental development and the ending of a horrible form of government of apartheid. So that covers all of those slides. So let's just go forward. See how quick we got to the end there. And now we're on the Global Features Team Embedding Strategic Foresight slide. And all I really wanted to say here to you, this extra besides the speaker's notes, is that foresight is useless without action. So we're not using the primer to go through all the tools, although you can say to your audience that some of the tools that you're seeing here that you're going to see in subsequent workshops and facilitation times with you is tools that break down assumptions and biases, which we've already spoken about in the primer and why that's so important. Values identification, why that's so important. We have tools for counter trends or otherwise identifying what's next or what could happen next. We have tools for impact identification, implications of what we're doing today or of decisions. We have tools to test our strategy today against future worlds and design new strategy, and foresight for innovation. So all of that is true, and that it all leads to action. So foresight is all about action. It's not about thinking about the future. It's about the actions we take today. And that leads us to our last slide, basically, before the video. And this is the natural foresight method. And so I thought, besides what's written in the speaker's notes here, that you guys would find it insightful. And most of you have already heard this from me, but I think it's important to reiterate that natural foresight was created by us as a tool to make foresight not a linear process or steps. Because when we make foresight, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this, we're going back and doing the same thing again. We're trying to fit a new way of looking at the world into an old model or an old operating system. And I think that that's not good. So, sometimes we do what we have to do, and a foresight has been used this way in the past, and I've used it this way. I'm just as guilty. But I've thought about this for a long time, and this is why at Kedge we've developed this natural foresight system that we're excited that you guys are using now as well. So natural foresight really is designed at its core. Nobody says that your audience has to absolutely know this, but one thing that's important to share with them here, of course, is that this is an ongoing process. And more than that, for your sake, for advanced practitioners, it's a circular process. It is very non-linear, almost non-Western, so to speak, in its thinking. It's more Eastern in its thinking. I'm not asking anybody here that's Eastern to be Western or Western to be Eastern. I'm just simply saying that this is a more natural way of looking at things. It's circular. It actually follows the infinity loop. You don't see that here on the slide, but it does. It follows that ongoing circular way of looking at the world, natural. And so that also means that it's not in steps. We might be in exploration one moment and action the next. We might be in discovery one moment and mapping the next. We might be in exploration and then to mapping and then to discovery and back to mapping and back to exploration. It all depends on where we are in the process. It's ongoing, it's non-ending. And so for first-time practitioners, yes, we want to move them from exploration to learn how to do that, to then learn how to build on that by scanning good discovery, and then build on that by mapping, and build on that by taking action. Yes, absolutely. But we also want to reinforce that around the focal issue, which is always growing, evolving as you're doing greater scanning, this is an ongoing, iterative, circular process that all parts, the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum, or however that saying goes, and that all the parts are interrelated and interconnected and can be and play off one another. You don't have to go by steps. So after that, of course, the last slide that you see is the video. That's the last slide that you'll be showing. And you, of course, as it says here, you can play the video or not. Of course, it's a great video. You've all seen it before. This is the one that was created by Latam. Does a great job of explaining how Walt Disney International is building the strategic foresight culture and the culture within the organization. I'm testing you to see if you know or not. No, I messed up. So thank you so much, and I believe the next video that you see will be a vet in Module 2. And let me just remind you, as you're going to see in the emails, that watch this video in the next week before our next Advanced Practitioners webinar. And we're going to use these videos as a way for you to practice, to ask questions about new material, to come to us and say, as you were saying X, Y, or Z on the video, it made me think of this, and to share with other regions so that the videos and the webinars play upon one another, and it gives us greater fodder to build this global features team and go forward with success and capability. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it so much. Be successful.